Welcome to Saints and Sevens, a Trench Crusade community podcast. My name's Jesse Aiken.
And I'm Johnny Doe. Welcome to the show this week.
I'm back, which is a big deal,
You are.
right? So,
thankfully.
yeah, I want to shout out Johnny doing an exceptional job doing the campaign last episode. And today we're kind of piggybacking right off that. Johnny, you talked about how to run a campaign by yourself, nitty gritty of that. Today we're talking about the nitty gritty of the rules of Trench Crusade, which we've been wanting to do for a long time. We've been building up to it.
Yeah, so we're going to dive in, basically kind of go through. We're not going to go all the way down into the nuance of every single piece of the rules. That would be probably more than needs to be covered within the context of the podcast here. But we're going to talk to you basically the general round, what it looks like, what your actions, your options are, those kinds of things, basics, what you need to play, little bits of information about the scenarios themselves, and then we'll move on. And we will, at a later time, we will come back. We will talk in depth about things like the battle kit. We will talk in depth about the individual scenarios, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, so today's just going to be an overview of just all the core rules, how to play the game, the phases of the game. I think is really important. How combat works, how movement works, all that good stuff.
Yep. And so if you want to follow along, if you have the Trench Companion, you can pull it up. You're just going to go into the core rules under the compendium, not the comprehensive rules. We're not going to go down to that section just yet. If we make a jump down there, we'll let you know. But you can follow along under core rules. And just under introduction, just real quick, we want to talk about what you need to play. You're going to need a warband, right? We've talked about that, previously in the other episodes. That's going to be, 6 to 10-ish miniatures. Depending on where you're at, especially if you're playing a campaign or something along those lines, it may go up beyond 10. But generally, that'll be enough to get you started. You need either a 3x3 or a 4x4 board. They also say anything with 24 inches of space between forces will also work, so it doesn't have to be that rigid. Some of the scenarios, when we go into those on a later date, will call for a 4x4 board versus a 3x3 board, but the majority of them are all on 3x3. And I'll be honest, I've played on both, and I kind of like the 3x3 a little bit more just because it eliminates a little bit of kind of a dead turn or two as everyone's just kind of like just moving across the board initially. But it can impact ranged combat if you're a ranged heavy warband. So that's just something to think about when you play. Lots of terrain. This is a game that benefits from plenty of terrain, so the more the merrier there. You're going to need 3 sets of 6-sided dice in different colors. You're going to need those for your regular rolls. You're going to need something to mark your blood markers and something to mark typically your blessing markers. Although if Black Grail is on the table, then you may also need something for infection markers. Tape measure of some sort in a way that makes sense to you, the rules which you got, and a friend or two. And that's what you need to play. The friend's the best part. That's the part you really want to bring along.
It's why we're here. It's the best part for sure. And yeah, this is really simple. I mean, and going a little more in depth, you talked about the miniatures you're going to want to bring, Johnny, and something we talked about on the show a lot. Trench Crusade is a miniatures agnostic game. Honestly, that means you can bring anything you want that really fits the aesthetic of the different models in your warband. So, you're going to need the soldiers to represent this. And as you mentioned, like a typical start to a campaign, probably 700 ducats is going to be, 5 to 10 models, something like that.
Yeah, if you go really tall, we talked about this. Obviously, we built your
bonus feed. Yeah,
on the bonus feed, we built your warband there, and you're 4 or 5 models at 700 ducats, right?
I think it's 5 models. Yeah,
at 5. So, which perfect opportunity to mention. If you want, we do have a Patreon. You can go over there and support if you like. You can find us over there. You get the bonus feed and all that kinds of good stuff over there. So we got some more content for you. So you can go 5, 6, 7 models around 700 ducats, generally speaking. If you're going up to 10 at 700, you're going pretty wide and using probably a lot of troops and not a lot of elites. So I would definitely expect that you will be somewhere around that 5 to 7 model at 700. So going over to the initial part, basically just kind of the overview of how the game works. You're going to have the initiative phase, which is basically just going to be exactly what it is in this game, like most games. But if you're not familiar with war games, initiative is basically how you're going to settle who goes first. That's going to be based on whoever has the lowest number of models. They're going to be able to choose if they want to go first or second. And then you roll off if you have the same amount. Highest person wins, and they can choose which way they want to go. Then there's going to be the activation phase. and that's going to be where you're going to do all the actions for your models, and you're going to alternate back and forth. Trench Crusade is an alternating activation game, which means I move a model or a unit, you move a model or a unit, and so on and so forth, and we do that until we're done. It's the far superior way to play games, in my opinions. The other option is the I go, then you go model, like some of the larger scale games have, which basically means Jesse moves every single one of his units, does all the things he wants to do, and then I get to go with my models and respond, straight across the board. Not necessarily the most compelling way to play, in my opinion.
No, for a myriad of reasons. When it comes to competitiveness, when it comes to strategy, and also when it comes to enjoyment of the players, right? Because someone's sitting around for a bit and waiting. Trench Crusade is not the case. We're alternating activations, which, in our opinion, is the best way to play miniatures games, and all the miniatures games we like to play are that. So I'm going to move like my Trench Pilgrim, then Johnny's going to go, move his maybe Court Sorcerer, right? And do something with that. Those models are done now, but we still have plenty of models to activate. Now it's back to me. I've got to go with another model that's not activated. So I think the important rule here, as you said, Johnny, is a model cannot be activated more than once per turn. And this is a core tenet of the rules. So you're going to have to activate every model before a round is over, but also you can't double activate.
Yeah, there's only exception to that is if you're playing a faction that has fire teams and you're able to set up fire teams, then that's one of actually the unique elements of that sub-faction or faction, and you're able to actually activate two models back to back, but it's based on a risky action, which we'll get into at a later time and place. And
it's not even one model double activating, that's two going back to back, which is obviously huge, right? Like netting actions and stealing stuff from your opponent because you're netting two things back to back, but still, it's those models individually are going once in that round.
Yeah, definitely. And it's super useful to be able to do that, which we'll talk about in tactics down the road when we get on those factions. And then the last phase you're going to go into at the end of the entire round. So this is after everyone's activated their models, everyone's done activating everything, is going to be the morale phase. The morale phase is basically when you're going to look at your starting warband. So say I started with 10 models. And if I am down to half of my models that are either have been taken out of action or are downed, and we'll address what that means in just a little bit, then we have to make a check basically at that point to see if we're able to continue on or not. And if you fail the first one, you become shaken, and then on the second one, you're out. So that's kind of how that works, just in an overview. And that, generally speaking, is the structure of the game from start to finish. That's how your whole rounds go, and then you just keep going until you get to whatever the end state is of the scenario that you're playing.
Absolutely. So let's move on to the activation phase, which I think is the meat of the game. Starting with what the activation phase is. So, of course, when it's your turn to activate a model, you must choose a model in your warband that has not been activated and activate it. And then your opponent must choose a model to activate that's not been activated, and then back and forth until you've activated every model, and then a round will be complete. But let's get into the actions you can do, Johnny, starting with the move action. So this is one of the most common actions, right? And this is something that's really straightforward, but let's talk about all the steps of it, because I think it's really important to know how this works. And also something I want to talk to a lot of people about, maybe that don't know the tape measure movement. And I'm going to get your expertise on that. But you can move your model a number of inches equal to its movement characteristic in any direction. No roll is required for this. And obstacles up to 1 inch high can be crossed over without penalty. And your model can climb over sheer surfaces if you pass a risky success roll. Difficult terrain is also crossed at half speed. A move action cannot be used to move a model within 1 inch of an enemy model. You must then use a charge instead. So, Johnny, how can we break all these down?
Yeah, definitely. So a couple things to note here, just in general when it comes to activations, is a model can basically do all of these activations once. So they're not restricted by all of the actions. They can basically take all of the actions one time. They're not restricted to only be able to do 2 action points or something like that, where they only choose 2 of the various actions. They can kind of do them until they, hit a failure of something called a risky success, and that is something I want to talk about really quickly before we move on, because while we're not going to get wrapped up in a lot of the keywords or the game mechanics as a whole, one of the key ones is that we need to know when we're talking about is what is a risky success roll. And basically, this is just a check that you are making to find out if you're able to succeed at whatever this task is that you're trying to take, the action you're trying to take. The reason a risky success is relevant is because if you fail a risky success roll, your turn is over, regardless of where you're at in your activations and stuff like that. So it's a consideration in your order of activations and things you choose to do, because sometimes certain pieces of battle kit, to use them as a risky success roll is required, or maybe it's a risky action to try and dash, for instance, or something along those lines. And these are things that will come into play when you're trying to assess how your character plays and what you do with them in actions.
Okay. Yeah, very well said. So let's break down this initial movement feature, which is move your model a number of inches equal to its movement characteristic in any direction. And kind of how this works, Johnny, I think something that maybe might catch some people off guard initially is like, how you, I guess the best term is to say break up this movement, because you could go like around a staircase, for instance, right?
Sure.
But that's not the tape measure laying down in a straight line, right?
Right. Yeah. So when it comes to movement in a three-dimensional space, especially if you haven't had experience with this, or if you have previously played games that had, say, like measuring sticks instead that you're able to flex and bend, like games like Marvel Crisis Protocol have that, where they actually have measuring devices that are able to actually turn and move. So basically what you're going to do is, say you have our beloved Stigmatic Nun, which we so enjoy and love, right? So they have an 8-inch movement base. So that means they can move 8 inches on their move. Now that may mean that I'm going to measure out 4 inches and then have to go 2 inches to the left to go around a building and then go my remaining 2 inches, right? So you're going to have to do like a broken measuring. The key thing that you want to be aware of is if you're measuring from the front of your base to wherever the end of that movement space is, that base is going to have to be within it. You're not going to measure from the front of your base and then put the model all the way at the end of the tip of the tape measure, because now you've given yourself like another inch or so of movement depending on the size of the base of that model.
Yeah, and we talked about obstacles here. I mean, 1 inch high can be crossed without penalty, but over that, if it's a sheer surface, it's going to be a risky success roll, which John already laid out, but difficult terrain itself is just crossed at half speed. That's a terrain conversation for later, but obviously things like water, maybe some of these pits and stuff out there, it's going to be difficult terrain that you're going to cross at half speed. So just going to reduce your speed entirely.
Yeah, definitely. And there's also dangerous terrain, which will come into play, and we'll talk about that at a later time as well, where there's other things that come in. That could be like a minefield, it could be barbed wire, any number of things, tank traps possibly, whatever the case may be. So there's different kinds of terrains that will engage with how you move through them. So 2 other move actions. Okay, so the key thing here is we want to define, because this is relevant coming up in a minute when we talk about the other actions you can take. Move, charge, and retreat are all considered the same action. Okay, so you can do one of those 3. You cannot do all of those 3 in a turn. So the second move action you can take is a charge. It's where you pick an enemy model that you can see that's visible to your model. Okay, so your model has to be able to see it and is within 12 inches. So the model has to be within 12 inches, and you also have to be able to see it from the point of view of your actual model itself. And that one, you declare it, that's your target of your charge. Then you're going to roll a single 6-sided dice, and you're going to add that result to your model's movement characteristic, and you're going to move it straight toward the target. And if you finish within an inch, hey, you get to fight. Okay, so pretty straightforward. If you fail, you just are going to move until the point that you can't move anymore.
So using our beloved nun again, she chooses a target within 12. She rolls a die. Let's say she hits a 3, Johnny, in this example, to be very specific. She's going to move her 8 inches plus 3, 9, 10, 11, and she will be 1 inch of that model, correct?
Yep, exactly. And she'll be able to get that fight in at that point.
Which is going to net you a free fight action, right? Which we'll talk about later, but that's important for the listener to know, because this is separate from a move action. This is a move action where you've declared someone within range 12 inches. And if you reach that spot within one inch or more, you will get the free fight. I say in quotes.
Yeah, basically it allows you to have that opportunity to fight the person. Whereas if you're on the outside, you can't. It's a requirement of the fight action to be within an inch of the model. So yeah. So retreat, you can only move a model that if it's within an inch. So this is a situation where you've got a model that probably either was charged or was in close combat and wants to try and run away. So you can take the retreat action. Okay. And you're going to be able to move a number of inches equal to your characteristic, your movement characteristic, in any direction, right? But you can't stop, or you have to stop outside of an inch of an enemy model. So you can't use a retreat action as like a way to get into an inch of a different opponent's model so you could fight them on that turn as well. You literally have to just move so you're outside of 1 inch distance from anything. Now, your opponent can take a fight action with one of their melee weapons before your model retreats and is moved away. And if it takes you down or out of action, which again, we will discuss in a minute what those terms mean, then the model doesn't get to move. So that's the concern with the retreat, obviously, is you're giving your opponent a free, basically fight action on you, a free attack. And that could end up actually putting you in a pretty bad position if you're not careful.
Yeah, very valid. Let's talk about the dash, which is a risky success roll, which Johnny laid out really well. So the dash action can be carried out in addition to a move. So it's extra moving, essentially. And we say a move, I mean a move, a charge, or retreat, as Johnny mentioned, all these move actions. So you can move your model a number of inches equal to its movement characteristic in any direction with the dash action. But before you can take the dash action, you must take a successful, risky success roll for the model first. If you succeed, you can move your movement, but you cannot charge or retreat. But if you fail, your activation immediately ends because it is a risky success roll action.
Yeah, so some places that this would come into play, right, is the obvious one, first and foremost, is, hey, I moved my full movement, or none. I did my 8 inches, right? Now I'm really trying to get over there and I want to get close to an objective, right? So now I'm going to choose to dash, and I can roll the risky success check. And if I succeed, which the nuns get an additional dice when they do this on a dash, then I am going to be able to move an additional 8 inches. So now I've made 16 inches of movement to get towards that objective. Now, of note, you do not have to do these in order. So I could do these in any order I wanted to. So for instance, it's the beginning of my turn. I can choose to dash first, even though it's a risky success check. And if I pass it, that 8 inch of movement that my nun did might get me in proximity to be able to then charge as my move action, right? So now I can get into close combat and I can actually make that attack that maybe I want to do. But of course, I'm running that risk of failing my dash, which means now I don't get to move at all.
Yeah, and we've also used the dash as a great tool to maybe use your gun line guys, right? Pop out, take a shot, try to dash at the end of your turn, get back into cover, right? Things like that. Even if they fail, at least you got to move out and shoot. But if they succeed, oh my goodness, now they're in cover, right? Very good.
Yeah, it's great. It's great for that kind of positioning game that people like Jesse are really good at versus me, which is the pure violence. Just run across and try and get in their face as soon as possible and stab them.
I was doing a lot of popping out and popping
You
back
were
in
on our
if I could.
TTS game. It was very frustrating. Served you well, though, right? And the pure violence did not serve me well in that game. So, hey, that's all right. I will seek redemption in the coming days. It's all right.
That's right.
So moving on from dash, so that's what your dash is going to get you. And then you're going to move on to a shoot action. So you can basically make a ranged attack with your model if you're more than an inch away from an enemy. So you can't be in that like fight range with an enemy to be able to shoot unless you have a certain piece of battle kit. Yeah, there's certain battle kit that might work around that, but generally speaking, you can't take a shoot action within an inch of an enemy. And you can't shoot and charge unless your weapon has the assault keyword. So this is where another keyword is going to come into play. If the piece of battle kit that you have that you're using for your range attack has the assault keyword, then that means you will be able to charge and fight in the same activation that you shoot. So that's going to be important.
Okay. Yeah, very simple. And there's only 2 left, but they're very, malleable, I guess, here. We got fight. You can make a melee attack with your model. If it's already within 1 inch of an enemy model and has a melee weapon, very straightforward. I mean, you start a turn engaged, right? You could just melee as your action. And last but not least, Johnny, we've got other. Some models have other actions they could take during activation. So think of your elite models with extra abilities, stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. So like the War Prophet with the Trench Pilgrims, they have a loudspeaker special ability. So this is where like your special abilities will come into play. The Court, you might have a Goetic spell, so you can cast a Goetic spell. These are the other actions that are going to be defined under your warband or your unit's entry in your roster sheet. That's where that's going to be. Again, a couple of nuances on fight. If you have multiple melee weapons, you're able to take multiple melee attacks. There's just a penalty on that secondary weapon when you take that attack. And again, just as a reminder, these can happen in any order, right? So you do not have to linearly go down this line. The only restrictions here, again, are that if you're going to shoot that will have an impact on your ability to charge and attack in close combat potentially. What kind of kit you're working with. So that's kind of the order of actions that you have. Those are your options that you have for every model. And again, you can do all of them until you fail a risky success check, or until you've completed them all and you have nothing else you can do. So Jesse, can you walk us through the idea of what success rolls look like and how that works?
Yeah, so this is the bread and butter of the game, right? This is pretty complex, but I think talk about the basics of it is going to help you understand the plus and minuses in the future, which we're definitely going to cover today. So to take a success roll, you roll 2 dice. You add any plus or minus dice to that 2 dice initial. So you're going to have 2 dice initial, then you're going to add the plus or minus dice. Then you're going to pick the 2 highest if it was a plus dice roll or regular roll. You're going to pick the 2 lowest if any negative dice were used. Add them together. Then you look at the table below to see if you have succeeded. And the instructions for the task you're carrying out will tell you whether if it happens or you succeed or if you fail. And additionally, if you're taking a risky success roll and you fail, the model's activation is over. As Johnny mentioned earlier, any risky success rolls are just going to end your turn. But in this instance, your opponent can then activate one of their models, of course.
Yeah, and so the beautiful thing about Trench Crusade is really the only number that you need to know is 7. That's the money right there, is your 7.
That's right.
So different effects will happen based on some other numbers when it comes to wounds on the effect there for combats and attacks. But 2 to 6, it's going to be a failure. Doesn't go. 7 to 11, all thumbs up. 12 is a critical success. Okay, and that means that when you're rolling on the injury chart, you get to add an additional dice to that check. Now, generally speaking, the mechanism that Trench Crusade uses is a dice pool mechanism. And so basically what that means is everything starts with a base of 2 dice. This is your 2d6, meaning 2 6-sided dice are in that pool. You're always going to have that as your base. Generally speaking, there's a couple of rare exceptions that kind of change that and will reduce that initially. But generally speaking, you always have those 2 dice as your core, that if nothing else, you're at least rolling 2 dice to see what you get. And then from there, various conditions and modifiers from your warband's unit, from the battle kit that you have, will add either plus dice or minus dice. And get ready, this is probably the most confusing element of this entire game.
Yes.
And once you wrap your head around it, it's super easy. This is why this game is so awesome. So in addition to those core 2 dice that you have as your pool, the foundation of your dice pool, certain conditions and events will either add plus dice or minus dice to that pool. Plus dice means that I am adding a 3rd dice to that dice pool. So now I have 3d6 that I'm going to be rolling, and I'm going to take my 2 highest. The only difference between that and my 2 dice pool is that I have 3 dice instead now. Now that could go up to 4 dice, 5 dice, whatever. However many pluses you get, you put all that dice into a pool, you roll them, you take your 2 highest, unless something tells you otherwise. The other kind of dice that can be added is a negative dice. And this can come from things like blood markers, conditions, whatever the case may be, or just poor skill. Like you might have a model who just is really garbage at shooting guns, and they're going to have, say, like a negative 2 dice penalty on their ranged, right? So anytime they go to roll, you put X amount of negative dice in there. And all that means is you just take the 2 lowest numbers that come up. That's all. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah, right. It's always like those 2. Right, you've got the pool, and then it's either those 2 lowest or those 2 highest, right? And then, as you mentioned, Johnny, like 12s are really good because you're going to get a lot of boons coming later, which we'll talk about later, but pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and the only thing to note is if you have a negative dice and a plus dice both being added at the same time to that dice pool, then they will negate each other. So, for instance, if I have a 2d6 roll, and so as my base dice pool, right, I have my basic 2d6, and I have something that gives me a +1 dice, and then I have a penalty on, say, my melee attack that gives me a -1 dice. That +1 dice and that -1 dice will negate each other, and I'll just be back down to a base 2 dice and just picking whatever the result is and going from there. So that's the only other kind of nuance there with the plus-minus dice. And then assuming, it's not you're going to roll for your success, see what you get. You're aiming for that 7 or higher. And if, it is a success and everything goes well, then you can go along, do the next active action on your turn for your model, unless it's a risky success roll. that you've taken, and then say you failed it, you rolled like a 5 or something like that, and then at that point your turn's going to end and it's going to go to your opponent. So that's basically how your dice checks work.
Yeah, and I know that some of the we're going to cover later, Johnny, but you mentioned blessings and blood.
Yes.
That's going to be plus and minus dice stuff.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk about that in just a minute when we get to those dice. But basically what those are is they are game mechanisms that basically add plus or minus dice to a pool and can be used in various ways, kind of like a limited resource. And we've talked about it in other episodes as well, obviously. So this isn't a foreign concept, but we'll kind of talk about how those play because when it comes to injuries, because that's typically when you're going to see a lot of those things kind of racking up. Which of course we can move over into combat at this point. So combat's basically divided into two kinds: range combat, melee combat, like most games. That's why you have that shoot action. This is why you have that fight action that you're going to be able to do. So ranged attacks are pretty straightforward. You're going to choose whatever range weapon that you want to use that your equipment has, that your unit has. Pick a target that's visible to your model and in range of that weapon. You're going to make your success roll. So you're looking for that 7 on the attack. If it's a fail, it misses. No harm, no foul, unless you have some sort of keyword that causes it to be otherwise. And if it hits, then you're going to move on and make an injury roll for that target. If it was a critical success, you're going to add a +1 injury dice to that, which means you're going to have that +1 dice we were talking about. So instead of rolling 2 dice, you're going to be rolling 3 dice and then adding those 2 highest together.
Yeah, pretty straightforward with the range attacks.
So the other thing that you can do is shoot into melee. That's another piece of that. So you have, say you have a unit that is aiming at a melee that's going on. So for instance, say you've got got a trench pilgrim, and the trench pilgrim has a semi-auto rifle, and they're aiming at a melee combat between our nun and a sorcerer from the court. So if your target is within an inch of a friendly model, so in this case they're in close combat, you're going to roll a dice to see who's attacked. So basically this is a 50-50 split. If you roll a 1 to 3, a friendly model's getting targeted. If you roll a 4 to 6, you get to hit that enemy target that you have. And then you're going to make a success roll, and then, the outcomes will be determined as they are. So it is very much a coin flip when you're trying to shoot into close combat with your own models, and you really want to think hard and long about whether that's going to be worthwhile doing that. Absolutely.
And range attack modifiers are a real thing, and we're going to talk about that when we're here, but shooting from elevated positions is going to give you +1 dice, which I think is huge. And that's going to be if the model is at least 3 inches higher than the target.
Yeah. And so that's going to be based on it. And most of the terrain in the game is built on a 3-inch base. That's kind of how they suggest if you're building from scratch or printing, you want to look at that kind of like 3-inch high base for your terrain, which will make this kind of a lot easier modifier to pick up. Cover comes into play. That's going to add a -1 dice if the model's in cover. And basically that means if the model is just in contact with a piece of terrain that's at least half an inch high and as wide as its base, it's going to count as basically being in cover. And that, assuming that piece is in between you and the model trying to shoot you. Now, I mean, if I'm backed up against the wall and you've got clear line of sight to me, then you're not going to get that terrain cover of that -1 dice. But otherwise, you will get cover. And then you've got long range, which is a -1 dice if the target is more than half the weapon's maximum range. So if you've got, I don't know, I think the semi-auto rifle is 24 inches, I believe. If you're shooting at something at 18 inches, you're going to have a -1 dice for that long range.
Very straightforward. We'll talk about melee attacks. So you choose a melee weapon and you pick a target within range 1. We talked about this before, the 1 inch. And you're going to take a success roll for the attacking model. And then if the roll is a failure, attack misses, no effect. But if it's a success, it hits. So then you start making an injury roll and you add additionally 1 more injury dice if it was a critical success.
Yep. And getting to what we were talking about before about if you have multiple melee weapons in play, say you have 2 swords or 2 axes or 2 of any kinds of melee weapons, you can attack with both, one after the other in any order that you choose. So you can attack with one or the other. The only thing that matters is that second attack is going to have a -1 dice added into the pool as kind of a penalty on that second attack. If fear is in play, so there are a lot of models, especially the big like centerpiece models, the court, other ones like that have the keyword fear. And fear is going to add a -1 dice as well if you are in close combat with a model that has fear, unless you have something that can cancel it. There's Battle Kit that allows you to do that, or certain like keywords that certain models have that will negate that. A defended obstacle is going to give you a -1, basically if the target's in cover. And that goes back to that same piece that we talked about before. In contact with a piece of cover that's between you and the attacking model, and it's at least half an inch high and as wide as your base, then you're going to get a defended obstacle, so a -1 dice for that. And then the last but not least is going to be the diving charge. And a model can attempt a diving charge, which basically means you're on terrain 3 inches or higher above your opponent. You're going to make a risky success roll for that model. If it's a failure, then the model's taken down and the falling injury roll is going to happen for that model, meaning your model who's making the attack. If it's success, you don't have to take any of that stuff, and you're going to be able to add a +1 dice to your melee attack as you're just kind of like Assassin's Creed style diving down to, like stab the guy in the head or roll into a pile of hay or something like that on the back end.
Yeah, and Johnny, to remind the listeners, what would constitute a risky roll here? Just the 2 dice, right?
Yeah, so as far as making the risky success, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's going to be just your 2 dice, and you're just going to roll a flat 2 dice, assuming there are no other modifiers in play there, and you're going to look for that 7 as a success. Now, again, there are a few things that can kind of modify that as a base number for your dice pool, but generally speaking, that's really what a risky success check is going to be, is just that 2 dice roll, hunting 7s.
Well, speaking of rolls, let's talk about the injury rolls. So we've hit our target. We've rolled a 7 or higher. Maybe we rolled a 12 and we gotten the additional injury benefit, which we'll talk about shortly. But let's talk about the injury roll. So to make an injury roll, you roll 2 dice and add any plus or minus to the roll. And these are going to work the same way as the 2 hit rolls, right, Johnny?
Yeah, exactly. Going to be the exact same, no difference whatsoever in the way they come to play. You're just building another pool that is separate from your initial dice roll that you made. It's going to affect, the outcomes are going to be the same. The only difference is now your success numbers are going to have a little bit difference of impact. So 2 to 6 is still going to be a failure. Nothing's going to change there. You're still going to pick your 2 highest unless you have some weapon or something that allows you to change that. And 7 to 8 now is going to give the down status to the model that you're attacking. So, and the injury, to be clear, happens whether you're shooting or you're in melee. So this is the same chart that's going to be used for both. You hit that 7 or 8, the model is down. You're going to give them something called a blood marker, which we'll talk about that in just a second. You're going to put that next to the model. This is where you're going to use one of those different colored dice to indicate what that is. And you're going to basically mark them as being downed or lay the model down if you're okay doing that. If you happen to get a 7 or 8 on an injury roll to a model that is already downed, then they're going to have 2 blood markers put next to them instead of 1. So it gives them like an extra blood marker if you're attacking someone who's downed already. And then if you get a 9 or higher, that model is out of action, means they have been killed, they have been seriously injured. And let me tell you, Trench Crusade holds nothing back. They do not care if it is your greatest centerpiece model and the lowliest guy with a trench knife that has stabbed them. Your model is going to be downed. Now, again, keeping in mind there are keywords that are in play, things like tough, that make it so that the first out of action is going to be ignored, right? So there are other keywords that will come to play that kind of offset the strength of these larger models that make them, a little bit stronger in that way. But yeah, that's one of the best parts. Very cinematic and very narrative effect of the game, where you can you're hunting for that 9 up, get them out of the way.
So let's talk about the injury roll and result modifiers that are cumulative. So the maximum number of negative injury modifiers cannot be more than -3, which I think is a really cool base rule. But let's talk about blessing markers, what they do to the injury chart. They're going to add 1 negative injury dice for each blessing marker you spent. Blood markers are the opposite. They're going to add +1 injury dice for each blood marker spent. Critical success, we were talking about earlier. It's when you roll that 12 or more on your dice pool to hit them. You're going to get 1 additional injury dice. And down, which Johnny just talked about, if the model is already downed, you're going to add +1 additional injury dice for melee attacks on the down target. But then there's a little bit more here, Johnny. Abilities and keywords, either add or remove injury dice, and any add or negative injury modifiers for abilities or keywords that apply to the injury roll. And then armor characteristics also add the negative injury modifier of the model's armor characteristic, if any, whatever that number is. And then the battle kit, as we've mentioned a couple times now, add the negative injury modifier for the model's battle kit, like an armor, shield, etc.
Yeah, and to clarify that, because I can also just the words are very close to each other, the terms are very close to each other. So the injury dice, the plus minus injury dice, is just means you're adding dice to that dice pool to roll on the chart. An injury modifier is literally, so like if you give a standard armor to your nun now has, say, -2, for instance, or something like that, under their armor characteristic. And what that means is whatever the result is of the dice pool roll for injury, your injury roll, you subtract whatever that number is, that injury modifier, from that overall number. So for instance, I might roll against your sorcerer and I might get a 9, which would be an out of action on that sorcerer normally. But say you have, armor, some reinforced armor or something like that on him with a -2. Now it only bumps down to a 7. And that means they're just downed instead of out of action. That's how injury modifiers work. So it's kind of like a end of roll modifier at the end.
Yeah, pretty cool. So you got the injury dice pool and the injury modifiers, which are separate from each other, but they work in tandem in a lot of ways.
Yeah, definitely. And it gets pretty streamlined pretty quickly, honestly. Once you run through a combat or two, you're going to get how this flows pretty rapidly. Falling, it was something that was mentioned earlier. So basically, if a model jumps, dives, or falls 3 inches or more, there's a chance that it could be injured. And on that injury roll, you're going to add a +1 dice for every 3 inches. So if you have one of those situations, say you do the diving charge, you fail your risky success roll. Now your guy is falling not gracefully to his face down into the trenches. For every 3 inches they jump, you're going to have a +1 injury dice added to that pool that you're going to roll to see what happens to you when you hit the ground, because that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, poor guy. Well, let's talk about the down result and what it means for your model. So if a model is taken down during its activation, the activation is just over. It ends. But also when you're down, you're going to add -1 die to any rolls you take if the model is downed. You're going to add +1 injury die for a melee attack if the model is down, which we just talked about that. Until the model stands back up, it cannot be moved for any reason unless it falls. And a model that is down stands back up when it is next activated. So its next activation phase. However, now its movement has been halved for the next activation, including that bonus for charging. And a model that is within range 1 of a ledge when it takes a downed result may fall off the ledge. So you're going to make a success roll for the model. If the roll is a success, the model is taken down but does not fall off the ledge. If the roll is a failure, the model then falls off the nearest ledge, then downed.
Yeah, so you have that follow-on effect of not only did you get, kicked and you fall down from that injury roll of a 7 or 8, but also now you fail that success. You fall off the ledge. You fall, 3-6 inches from the top of a building. And now you're going to take another injury roll with maybe +1, +2 dice and that fact. And that may be what actually ends up taking you out of the game.
Yeah, the fall could make it happen. All right, Johnny, let's move on to markers. And let's talk about blood markers and basically how blood works and how it's spent and the max blood you can have.
Yeah, so this is a key, and we've referred to this before previously, and this can basically affect all the stuff we just talked about. So you have to understand there's this constant push-pull in this resource that exists in the game called blood markers. So basically, whenever you're wounded, so unlike a lot of games that are out there, in Trench Crusade, your model doesn't have like a predeterminate set of wounds that they have, right? Where if I just get 5 wounds on this guy, then he'll be taken out of action and be removed from the game, and I don't have to worry about him anymore. It doesn't work that way in Trench Crusade. That's why you have that injury roll where the 7 and 8 is a downed result, and then the 9 and up is going to be an out of action, right? And things that modify that result. Because we're not tracking wounds here. The only things that we're going to be tracking is these things called blood markers, blessing markers, or infection markers, okay? So blood markers are basically kind of sort of how wounds are tracked, right? You can't ever have more than 6. But it's a resource that your opponent can spend anytime they want. So anytime that you suffer a wound, you're going to place a blood marker to it. Certain circumstances, like we talked about before, may add more to it. And then your opponent can choose to spend 1 or as many as they want to put an additional -1 die into whatever dice pool that you're rolling. So that could be on successful actions. It could be, or risky success actions. It could be on your injury rolls, whatever the thing is. They basically can burn it to give you a -1 dice to your dice pool, which is super cool. And each time that your opponent makes an injury roll for the model, they can alternatively choose to use the blood marker as a +1 injury dice, giving them a larger pool to roll when they're rolling to try and get an injury. So basically, it benefits your opponent when you have blood markers on them, right? Because I can use them either to add a +1 dice to my injury roll on you, or I can use it to incur a -1 dice penalty to you when you're making some sort of success roll while you're doing something, which may means like you're trying to shoot me and I'm going to use one of those blood markers to make you have a -1 dice to your pool.
It's the game. It's the resource, right?
It really is. There aren't a lot of games in wargaming where you have this kind of like rolling resource thing that you have to keep track of. So the follow-on piece about the blood markers, that's really cool. And this is super relevant, especially when, for instance, you may be fighting someone's greed-oriented Hell Knight that you have an issue that you're trying to get them taken out. Just hypothetically speaking, we'll just use that as an example.
Hypothetical, yeah.
Hypothetically. So there's a thing called a bloodbath, right? And the bloodbath is when you have 6 blood markers on a model, or 3 if they are already downed, and you're going to use all of them to convert to a bloodbath. And basically that means you're going to roll 3 dice and you're going to add them all together now for your result. Instead of adding 2 dice, right, taking your 2 highest and adding them together, you're going to roll 3 and add all 3 together for what the highest result is. And then that result is what's going to count on your injury roll. It's pretty sweet. It's great when you get those like 19s, those super high numbers. They're awesome. I'm kidding. You can't get 19 on 3 dice, everybody, but you know what I'm saying. Yeah. So the other resource that you have primarily, if Black Grail is not on the table, is going to be blessing markers. So blessing markers are far more rare. They come up in not a lot of instances. The stigmatic nuns are someone who have them inherently baked into them. There is Battle Kit that will give you blessing markers as well. And basically, they're similar to blood markers, meaning they are a dwindling resource, but they're specifically used to aid success rolls for the model that has them. So every time that your model, say your stigmatic nun, for instance, has a blessing, you're going to do the same thing, use a blessing marker, which is going to be a different colored 6-sided dice that you're going to go up to it. It's going to have that same limitation for your blood markers, and you're going to be able to choose to spend one of them to add a +1 dice whenever you're making an injury roll for the model. Or a -1 to an injury dice. So it's going to be very much the same, but it's going to be kind of an inverse version of what the blood marker is, because it's going to be for your model alone to be able to spend. And again, it's not going to be limited to just one. You can burn as many of them as you have and you want to use. It's one of the things I like about the stigmatic nuns. They take injuries. They can basically swap their blood markers for blessing markers. So you're able to constantly be able to use that kind of exchange rate on them.
Yeah, and Antioch has a lot of cool ways to gain blessing markers throughout the game, right? And some we'll talk about in the future. But as you mentioned, they're very rare and the inverse of blood.
Yep, and I love them. I like to use them. And so Baron of Dice makes a set of blood and blessing markers that you can actually get from them. They also have all the faction dice. If you're not familiar with Baron of Dice is, you can look them up. I'll try and remember to link them in the show notes for you. They are a custom dice manufacturing company who makes all kinds of themed dice for all kinds of different games. And they also make the themed dice for Trench Crusade, which includes not just the warband factions, but also they have a custom set of blessing and blood marker dice that you're able to use as well. And you can get those, and they're pretty sweet. I've got them. Big fan of them.
I've got them too.
So, yeah, the last section is the morale phase. And the morale phase is what we already talked about beforehand, which is if you reach that point in the game that half of your starting models, so it does not necessarily equate to what you brought to the table, because remember, we mentioned this previously, certain scenarios are asymmetric in what gets fielded. And in that asymmetric space, you may bring, say, 10 models to the game, but you may only get to field 7 of them, for instance. So whenever you get to half the models in your warbound that are either downed or out of actions at the same time, rounded up, then you're going to make a success roll. This is the same thing as before. We're going to roll that 2d6, looking for a 7. And if you get a 7, you get a success. Anything higher, you're good to go. Everything goes on as normal. It's all great. If it fails, then you become shaken. So a shaken warband is in a bad spot. That means any time that they're making any sort of success roll, not a risky success, just any sort of success roll, meaning, am I going to be able to shoot this guy? Am I going to be able to, activate this special ability, whatever it may be? they're all going to be treated as risky success. So that means anything that you fail will end the activation of your model immediately, which can be a real bummer. So at the end of the next turn, you're going to make another success roll for your warband's morale. And it doesn't really matter where it's at. You're just going to have to make that again. If you succeed, you're no longer going to be shaken. You're back in business as usual. Everything is fine. If you fail it, though, again, so this is your second morale check that you've made, then your warband flees and they're gone and you immediately lose the game. And that's the end of your warband for that game. And that's going to be the end of the turn, like we talked about before.
Yeah, which seems rare, but also, much more forgiving than the original rules, Johnny, which I know we're not talking about today, but I mean, this check was a lot more intense when the game first came out.
Yeah, definitely. And I've had it happen to me. I've gone down to the morale phase a couple of times, or had my opponents go down to it a couple of times.
Okay.
And I had once in all of my games have I had my warband actually flee the field, but I think I was down to actually, by the time that happened, like 3 models or something like that. I'd pretty almost been tabled at that point when I got to where I had to make the morale check. And I got my first one. I just failed that second one. So that was the issue there. And again, like everything, there's battle kit that can help kind of bolster these checks, when you have to come up, but they don't necessarily happen that often, I would say.
Okay. Well, now that we've done the core rules and the core phases of the game, I mean, that's the meat of today's episode. But what else do we want to hit, Johnny, before we leave our way out? And we mentioned too, we're not doing keywords today, but we will do them in the future, especially when we cover the individual warbands, and we will cover their individual models with the keywords in detail. But just know keywords are a big part of altering a lot of the rules we've talked about today.
Yeah, absolutely. And the beautiful thing about the Trench Companion app, the web interface that they have, is it is so just, the UI is just perfect in so many ways, and the way that you're able to engage. So anywhere in your warband entry or in a scenario listing, whatever it may be, or a piece of battle kit, whatever it is, the keywords are going to be highlighted, and you're going to be able to just tap that highlighted word and it will pop up in a smaller window what the definition of that keyword is. So you know exactly how it interacts in the context of what you're talking about with that piece of battle kit or scenario, whatever it is.
Yeah, which is going to really help you understand your models and also just know the interactions. As we mentioned, we're like, how are we breaking the rules? Like you mentioned assault earlier.
Yeah, exactly. And that keyword will be tied to, say, certain machine gun or a certain like rifle or something along those lines, right? Like the semi-automatic rifle is the reason I like those over the bolt action for my trench pilgrims, because the semi-auto is an assault, has the assault keyword, which means I can shoot at 24 inches, and then I can also charge in and assault somebody, especially if I put a bayonet at the end for like, one ducat or whatever the case is. So you're going to be looking at those weapons based on whatever your gameplay method is. Semi-automatic or fully automatic pistols, same thing. They're great. They can be used in close combat as a second melee weapon. They also allow you to shoot and assault in the same turn. All that kind of stuff, is super handy. So,
well, closing out our innate rules of the game, Johnny, I know you wanted to hit on a terrain a little bit and scenario terrain in particular, but also just like, what are the terrain rules and how do they affect these base rules? We talked about open terrain a little bit. We talked about area terrain, difficult terrain too, but let's just get into all these features real quick.
Yeah, I'm just gonna touch basically on the battlefield archetypes really quickly, because those are gonna kind of impact the scenarios. Each of the scenarios that you're going to look at when you're picking what you're going to play is going to, the majority of them will refer to a battlefield archetype, and basically what that means is kind of the structure of how the table should be laid out, and kind of a 300-foot overview. So there's only 3 of them, and they're all listed in the Trench Companion app, of no man's land, decimated ruins, and trench lines. So this kind of gives you the structure of kind of what does the field of battle generally look like. The scenario will then give you the specifics of where your objectives go and those kinds of things. So basically, no man's land is going to be that space that's going to be between the trenches and whatever war it is. There's going to be, for terrain pieces, there's a list of things like trenches, ruined buildings, corners of buildings, difficult terrain like rubbles, craters, fallen trees, dangerous terrain like barbed wire, swampy ground, those kinds of things, hills, linear terrain like walls, hedges, etc., and then like landmarks, which are going to be like shrines and statues, altars, just kind of like, things that might be around in a warband. They're going to kind of give you basically the number of terrain pieces that you should use, and kind of how those are going to be set up. And that's going to be kind of mimicked along the way with these other two battlefield archetypes. So Decimated Ruins is another one. And this one is basically going to look like a city structure that has been bombed out potentially, or something along those lines, or, you know, an old large cathedral maybe that the battle's taking inside the cathedral, right? The cathedral's been demolished, maybe a tank's driven through it, or whatever the case may be, right? Whatever your narrative story looks like for that piece of terrain. And it's going to have like landmarks, that same sort of like wrecked vehicles, statues, those kinds of things. Some difficult terrain, which can be that rubble, craters, dangerous terrain, ruined buildings, and like corners of ruins, those kinds of things. This is going to have a lot more building structures. So whereas your No Man's Land might have, you know, like 2 pieces of each kind of terrain, this is going to have like 6 or 7 like ruined buildings and a couple of other small pieces of terrain. And it'll give you guidance about how that's going to set up. And then you've got trench lines, and trench lines are going to be basically that interconnected trench network system. We've probably all seen plenty of, you know, trench boards out there being played in. This is admittedly why when they developed the Carcass Front, they wanted to give us a different visual aesthetic to play on instead of just war-torn trenches and that kind of a thing. And this is going to be using a trench line, some ruined terrains, and then some dangerous terrain like barbed wire, those kinds of things, difficult terrain, craters, etc., and some landmarks. So this is going to be most of the trench boards that you've seen already. And then one of these 3 archetypes are going to be used to kind of define what kind of terrain you're going to use and set up on the board. And then the scenario is going to define, hey, these are the objectives. This is where the objectives go. Here's your deployment zones, etc. And here's the win conditions of the scenario. So that's kind of how that's going to interact with your scenarios down the road.
Yeah, it's really straightforward. Just pick the scenario, then build the terrain off of that. But also, as you mentioned, Johnny, like the terrain types and the story you want to tell in your campaign, which I know is another topic about theme and just kind of the story you're telling. But regardless, they go hand in hand with the scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, you know, again, a piece that's going to help, you know, outline the story itself. And you can, you know, when you're looking at your terrain builds, think about, you know, what do you want it to look like? Do you want a congested urban environment like you would have, you know, in some of the later world wars and some of the larger cities that were under bombing threats, right? Do you want that far front of combat in an area that maybe hasn't been destroyed by, you know, artillery shelling or something yet along those lines, right? It's still kind of relatively untouched, you know, kind of behind enemy lines kind of a style? Or do you want that, you know, that bloody, muddy trench warfare that, you know, is so iconic with the game system as well?
Absolutely. So these are the base rules. It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple. If you can get your head around the plus and minus dice, I think, Johnny, is a big part of this.
Yeah, I definitely think that's probably the piece that I have seen in every game that I've taught that people got hung up on initially, was trying to understand the plus minus dice delineation, because the inclination is when I hear negative dice, I'm going to take a dice out of the pool versus putting a dice into the pool. And that's kind of, I think, the only rub, you know, and I don't know if that comes from the developers not necessarily being, you know, some of them not being native English speakers when they wrote the rules, or it's just kind of how they decide to think about the game mechanism itself. But either way, once you kind of get a grip on what that looks like, it's an extremely accessible and simple gameplay unilaterally through the game. Like it's probably, again, I've said this before and I will continue to say it, probably the best game rule set that I think I've probably played in like 30 something years of wargaming. So yeah, they did a good job with it.
Yeah, we've talked about it on our show a lot, but the floor to learn is so low. And so add in skirmish game, 3x3 campaign narrative, and also alternating activations. I mean, that's why we love it. That's why we're doing the show, right?
Absolutely. So that's going to be a basic overview of all of the rules. We will, in future episodes, we will dial down in and go through the keywords so we kind of know how those interact and play. We'll talk in depth about the scenarios themselves, which will obviously also touch on, you know, terrain during that time as well. But that is the gist of all you need to know about how to play the game. There are, you know, niche scenarios that may come into play, like jumping gaps or, you know, certain minor situations like shooting a downed person instead of a melee attack on a downed person that might come into play. But generally speaking, that's the bulk of the rules right there. Easy day.
Easy day. Start playing today, right? And get into the Trench Companion app and start learning more. As Johnny mentioned a lot in this episode, like any questions you have, jump in the Trench Crusade main website and get in the rules or the Trench Companion app, and there's more details there. And as Johnny mentioned many times this episode, the Trench Companion app is so great because if you build a warband, all the rules of your models are in your warband page. And I think that's a crucial thing to know. So you know the core rules here today. Listen to this episode, but then you have your models in there that kind of spell out the rest of your actions you have available to you and the nuances of the keywords.
Yeah, exactly. And the special abilities are lined out, under the character itself in the game or in the app itself, and then all of your war kit, your battle kit, and everything else defines it. So it's all integrated right there when you play, and it's super easy. And I am notoriously not the person who wants to have an electronic device with me when I'm playing a game, but I will say the UI of the Trench Companion app is so smooth that I don't even think twice about it, because it feels like going through a character sheet or a game manual, but faster and smoother. So I have, and part of it I think may be the way they designed it as well, because it looks more like an actual like page versus say certain other game systems who it's much more clearly a computer interface, kind of interaction with the UI. So yeah, I have zero complaints about the Trench Companion app. They've done a great job with that. So
okay, well that's the rules. Very exciting, very straightforward, and it's going to lay the groundwork for our future episodes, Johnny, which we're doing very soon on this show about the warbands and how to play the warbands of Trench Crusade.
Yep. Yeah, we'll be deep diving those guys coming up soon, starting on that list. But before we get to that today, I believe we need to head over to the Trench Shrine, my friend.
Let's get over to the Shrine and learn about something new that's going to hopefully enhance our experience with the Trench Crusade world and, give us some fun on the side. So this is a fun topic today, Johnny. I thought I'd go off the beaten path a little bit more than normal.
Mm-hmm.
We've done cool things in regards to direct references in Trench Crusade, whether it be the grim, dark nature of the game or even some stuff coming in the Carcass front, pulling from the H.P. Lovecraft side of things. Today's a little bit more esoteric, I suppose. But I had the idea of talking about some video games in regards to horror. And this could be the first of many, but I think if we're going to talk about horror video games, we got to start with the best first. The best
bold statement.
Franchise possibly. And this is my opinion and my opinion alone, but we're going to talk about Silent Hill and why Silent Hill might be the best horror franchise of all time and why it actually has connections to Trench Crusade. So I'm going to open the door initially, and then we're going to get into a little bit more detail. So how do you feel about this?
So, I immediately go to, I call him Pyramid Head. I think his technical name is the Red Pyramid, right? Like from Silent Hill 2.
Yeah.
And I see the Trench Pilgrims and their iron caporets. Like I look at that and I'm like, hey, or like the new Naval Raider, like the leader for the Naval Raider has kind of a little bit of that vibe going too as well, aesthetically speaking. And I distinctly remember the abject terror of the Silent Hill games. And I didn't play them extensively, but I distinctly remember watching my buddy play them. And then the times that I did play them myself, they did something amazing with a far inferior mode of storytelling with those early systems. Cause I think Silent Hill was PS1 initially, right? It was like the initial, game systems back then. Right. And
Silent Hill 2 was PS2.
PS2. Yep. Was the use of sound, right? The use of fog, those kinds of things. Incredible for so early. Like we're talking like The Last of Us levels of storytelling in early days, right?
Oh, a game from 99 and 2001.
Yeah.
In specific reference to Silent Hill 1 and 2. Konami really brought the heat.
Yeah. So what's your background with those games? How did you get involved with Silent Hill? And then what is it that you're smiling? So obviously you adore the franchise. I want to know about what's up with that.
So a little backstory on me. Silent Hill 2 is my foray into the universe initially. And Silent Hill 2 came out in 2001. As Johnny mentioned, an insane time to do the stuff that they did. I think Silent Hill is really well known for its storytelling, its ambiance, its soundtrack, in addition to its sound design, right? They're their own entities, right? And they're all firing on like 10 out of 10 cylinders. And the only thing holding the games back possibly is like hardware, right? And so you've got all these creators in the music space, in the sound design space, in the story writing space that are kind of at the top of their game. The only thing pushing the game back is like the tech at the time, right? And the games after this continue to push. So I did play Silent Hill 3, Silent Hill 4, The Room, and other numerous Silent Hill games that came after. And what fascinates me about the Silent Hill games, without giving away too much if you never played them, they're peak horror and they're peak survival horror because at their core, they're character stories about characters struggling with real life psychological issues, elements, trauma. And the horror is just an icing on their true character arc. And in fact, giving a little bit more away of the story of Silent Hill, but I mean, Silent Hill is a derelict town, right? And it is a derelict town that when you visit it, if you're someone with these issues or maybe trauma in your past you've never resolved, it opens doors where you start seeing things or experiencing things that maybe other people might not be experiencing, right, in that same town, despite just being a random derelict town, right? What's so interesting about Silent Hill is each story is very real, very serious, on top of all this amazing music, ambiance, and frankly, as you said, Johnny, abject terror, because these games are the premier survival horror game. Half the time, it's not even a good idea to fight.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like I'm trying to rack my brain because that was like prime gaming era for me. The late 90s and the 2000s. And I don't, when did Dead Space come around?
Like 2009-ish.
Yeah, like way later, right? Yeah. So I think Resident Evil was the only other thing that we had that was probably horror adjacent at that era. Like I don't really remember the horror genre being really that big of a deal. And Resident Evil, I mean, limitations of gameplay, right? But it was basically jump scares. Like that was the bulk of what Resident Evil was. And then you're going to shoot your way out of everything, more or less. Silent Hill, not that way at all. Silent Hill was creepy. That game gave people nightmares. I know it gave people nightmares. Yeah, it wasn't a jump scare game. It wasn't a combat focused game. I mean, that was an element to it, right? But to your point, like that's generally not the way that you handled the situation. And it, to me, was the first, because like I consider Resident Evil like action horror-ish, maybe, right?
Yes,
it's like an action
for
game,
sure.
right? With horror trappings. And it was, like I said, jump scares. It was, tense, whatever. That was fine. But Silent Hill to me was the first survival horror game in production because it was very unsettling. And I still remember the first time, like you walk in to Silent Hill and the fog settles and you're like, what is happening? You can't see. It's quiet. There's weird noises going on. Oh, man. And it's just a story is unfolding along the way. And you're just like, this is crazy. Like, what's happening?
Well, in Silent Hill 2 in particular, my bias is going to reveal itself. It's my favorite video game of all time. And part of the reason why is like nonlinear storytelling. Like you're dropped into the town. You got to figure out the story as you go along. There's eventually a linear path you will figure out. But there's so much exploration. There's so much vibes. There's so many little puzzles. There's so many little like, a lot of the Twin Peaks vibes, which really resonate with me in a lot of ways, are in Silent Hill as well, which I think is very cool. We've got a lot of connective tissue between these things, like the Lynchian vibes and things, which I'm sure we'll talk about on this series and the show. But it's like learning the story through world building, not through being told anything.
Yep.
As James in Silent Hill 2, there's almost no one to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple characters to talk to, and they might not even be seeing the same things as James, but they're also seeing things. But then you go around the town, you learn about kind of how the town closed down. You're reading newspaper articles. You're exploring the city itself. You're learning so much on top of seeing all these monsters that are unique to James's story. And this is a feature of the Silent Hill games. The monsters typically have no connective tissue between games because Silent Hill is an ethos and a feeling and a vibe based on the character. And I think a lot of people that haven't played more than one game know that, but it's kind of a spoiler in a way, but it's not because every game has different characters dealing with different things and the monsters kind of manifest themselves in different ways. Now, talking about Red Pyramid Head, he's probably the most iconic character from Silent Hill, and he is the main antagonist of number 2, never has any dialogue, and he's always antagonizing James, the main lead, and you don't know why, right? And by the end of the game, you will learn why. But regardless, he has so much presence and you don't know why he's undefeatable, why he just keeps coming, right? And why he even kills other monsters in the city. That's kind of like a jarring thing in a horror game for other monsters to kill other monsters that could hurt you in a video game setting, right?
Yes.
He does that too.
It's like the indiscriminates of the violence of the monster, right? And
Yeah.
I think there's two things that stand out to me on that piece. Is one, like, I feel like the Red Pyramid was it's kind of like what Resident Evil tried to do with Nemesis, which was that like giant hulking, I'm going to track you down. I'm the indefensible, I am always going to come after you kind of bad guy that you can't kill, you can only hope to kind of like fend off sort of thing. And like that plotting terror, right? That's why Jason was scary in the early movies, right? Was because like you can't hurt him, he just keeps coming, kind of a thing. And then an element that I don't think we really saw in games as much, sort of, again, I keep drawing the parallel to Resident Evil because it's probably the only thing that was kind of quasi close to it at the time. But in Resident Evil, even it was different in a lot of ways. But you didn't talk to people, right?
Yeah.
It was an experiential discovery, not information dumping that was happening to you. And that added to that creepy vibe of like, I am alone,
Yeah. And speaking of Resident Evil, I mean, the earlier Resident Evils were closer to Silent Hill than the later ones, right?
Yes.
And despite all Resident Evil games having action as a feature and blunt horror as a feature, they got more that way as they went on, right? So the earlier Resident Evils were way closer to early Silent Hill. Mm-hmm. So much so that we even had these weird fixed camera angles, right? Which was a feature of horror in those early days where you go into a room and all of a sudden your third person character is walking towards you as you're controlling the joystick, right? That was a feature of the 90s survival horror. Resident Evil did away with that. And eventually Silent Hill did too. But I just think it's interesting. They had those similarities early on, but Silent Hill, all about vibes. I mean, if you want to look up these soundtracks, they're all incredible. Every game, the artists that did the music, and then as Johnny mentioned, the ambiance music was a separate entity, but the composer also did ambiance music on top of sound design. And so you've got this composer writing great music, like songs that are themes of characters, but then you've also got disturbing industrial ambiance music when the Silent Hill stuff is really hitting the main character. Yep. And then you've also got sound design, which they layered on top of that as well. It's an all encompassing animal, and it's really cool. And I want to talk about it here. All the Silent Hill games are good. All of them are enjoyable. All of them tell these character arcs of these broken people. But Silent Hill 2 to me is the coup de grace. It's the best Silent Hill game. And it's also one of the best games of all time. And it's been remaked recently on PS5, which is very exciting and crazy long time coming, because this is not how do we say this? This is not a press a button, it remasters. It was a full remake from the ground up from Konami, which is cool.
Yeah, which is always nice when you see a game that like you enjoyed in your youth getting that sort of like attention again, and that kind of, value, especially a game as iconic as Silent Hill 2. It's like when they went through and they started remaking the early Resident Evils, when Last of Us, the first one, got a re-up.
Of course.
A handful of these games get that kind of overhaul. And it's really rewarding to go back and be able to visit them, or in a case like this, like open it up to like new generations of people to come out and play that game. And since you said that, because I didn't realize it actually got a remake, I'm literally thinking as soon as I can get enough time to finish my Spider-Man game,
there you go.
Maybe I'll have to jump onto Silent Hill 2 and see if it's still as terrifying now as it was back then. I'm pretty sure it will be.
Yeah, and a cool part about Silent Hill, without giving any story stuff away, because I don't want to spoil anything for anybody, because I think it's one of the greatest stories out there, because it unfolds to you as the player organically, as Johnny's mentioned multiple times and through this, the story of James. And this is every Silent Hill game. You're going to figure out their story by the end, right? But the clues and I guess, Chekhov's gun, right? It's there in the first scene. And it's absolutely insane that we've got writing like that in a horror game, and you've got to get to the end of the game to fully realize the full picture. But if you start a new game over again with knowledge of the finale, you could figure out the ending from the first scenes. You know what I mean? And that's a great movie too.
Yeah, well, that's one thing I was going to say was, like, I was trying to think in the late 90s and early 2000s, who did we have that was really doing nonlinear storytelling? Like, when in Tarantino, Tarantino obviously is probably like the most iconic nonlinear storyteller out there. There have been plenty of others as well, obviously, but I'm just trying to think in that era, who was doing that sort of storytelling in media and film, and I don't know, not a lot's jumping out at me.
Yeah. I mean, I would venture to say David Lynch, we mentioned earlier, where it's
Lynch,
like,
yep.
maybe it's less about not the word nonlinear, more about just like the cohesiveness of the story being digested slowly over time, right? Because Silent Hill is very much that. There's a linear path you will eventually go on. You cannot progress in the game until you go to the hospital, right? You cannot progress in the next part, but you've got to go through the city and figure out why you're going to the hospital first. But it's all the clues along the way of even why you're going to the hospital and why would you even want to go that way and what the path is, right? And the vibes, right? And that's kind of where I think of Twin Peaks and Lynch and stuff in a lot of ways, where it's like, you know, oh, there was a lot of stuff along the way that were nuggets that we didn't know, and now we know, you know.
So let me ask you this: how does Silent Hill 2 play into Trench Crusade? Like, where do you see this overlap? Is it an experiential vibe sort of thing? Is it some sort of like inspiration? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and this is where it gets a little bit more abstract for sure, but I think you nailed it with the Red Pyramid in particular. He's very much the vibes of Trench Crusade, and I would say Franchina would say the same thing. I don't know personally. Franchina is a big Silent Hill fan, but I would say there's some vibes there. But I also say too, like just the unknown and I went into a new area and I saw a new monster that just absolutely terrified me that I didn't know existed in this world, right? How am I going to overcome that, right? I think that might be a feature of the Trench Crusade good guys, the people of New Antioch and the Sultanate and stuff like that, where it's just like, it's kind of a unknown world. I think of the fog, as you mentioned, Johnny, earlier, where it's like, what's beyond the fog? You know, I mean, what's beyond the trenches? So this is definitely more of a vibes thing. I definitely think the music and the ambiance of Silent Hill is a huge feature of probably what it would feel like to be someone in humanity holding on to the humanity of living in this world. And then all of a sudden you see a praetor step out of the fog.
Yeah, exactly. And that would be the Red Pyramid and just your most terrifying day as your James the Trench Pilgrim.
Yeah. And the connective tissue for me too is Trench Crusade being a very model agnostic game. We've talked about a lot on the show. I would love to get a Trench Pilgrims, Heretics, Court, whatever it may be, whatever I land on aesthetically, a Silent Hill monster inspired team. You know, I mean, those Silent Hill 2 nurses kind of have some nun vibes, you know, like there's things all over the place. And that's part of James's story, by the way. I mean, once again, not giving away part of the story, but it's like every art piece in that world has a meaning for the story. And I think that's probably the biggest connective tissue for Trench Crusade is, you know, some of the stuff in Trench Crusade we talked about is pretty intense, right? But there's artistic meaning behind why they look the way they do and what they mean in the lore. And that changes from Silent Hill game to Silent Hill game. Like Silent Hill 1 and 3 are very, very different from 2. But even going to the modern world, we just got Silent Hill F released, which is very exciting. It's one I haven't played yet. It's the only Silent Hill game I haven't played. And that takes place in Japan, which is very different.
That's a vibe.
That's a vibe. And we've got cherry blossoms turning into demonic things, you know.
Rad. Okay. I can show up for that. I love some Japan stuff. I grew up on, you know, samurai and kung fu movies, so I'm a big fan of that era. So I love it.
It's cool.
Well, that's really cool. I think there's an interesting overlap between quality game writing and film, and that is sometimes missed, especially when you look at a lot of the attempted adaptations of video games into, you know, multimedia for, you know, consumption. And one of the things that I really enjoyed is if anyone has watched The Last of Us on HBO, there is a podcast by the HBO studio that they did specifically on the Last of Us, and it had the showrunner and it had the game designer and writer as the two core, and then they would bring in other people to talk about it, and then they had the guy who voiced Joel in the video game is the host basically. And they would go episode by episode. They would talk through it, right? And I think the coolest thing was, especially in those first few episodes, discussing how the showrunner and the game designer or author kind of merged. And it was over shows like the showrunner had also done Chernobyl, right? And he had watched Chernobyl and he was a big fan of it. Meanwhile, the showrunner was a huge fan of The Last of Us. like, and was just obsessed with those games. So there came this like random call conversation between the two of them, and they both immediately were like, yes, absolutely, let's do this without any hesitation. And that hear them talk as, hey, I'm a video game composer and writer versus I make film and I make TV shows or those kinds of things. And them to have a dialogue and a discussion about the similarities and the differences in working in those mediums as far as storytelling is concerned, but how they both are able to maximize on that in this like retelling was really, really interesting. And I feel like that's kind of a similar piece here where you have very high quality storytelling and writing that far outpaces a lot of film.
Yeah, I know.
Sadly.
It is sad. And we'll have to talk Last of Us another time, Johnny, because it's obviously very high on my list. I would say The Last of Us 1 and Silent Hill 2 are my top 5 games of all time. And it is very cool, this meshing of skills, as you're mentioning, but also too, like, something I'm going to harp on a lot on the show, I think, which I think more people should do, is the importance of horror. And when horror is used correctly, the stories you can tell with horror. When horror is used incorrectly, obviously it's very low hanging fruit. It's bad stories. It's bad character decisions. And you and I have talked about this before, Johnny, off mic. But when horror is used effectively, especially in the Silent Hill medium and even The Last of Us, where it's like, it's all about character arcs. It's all about what the characters have experienced in their past, their future, their present. And the horror is just an element of the environment and its vibes and it's how do these characters respond. It's a powerful, powerful tool. It's the same powerful tool we use in fantasy too, right? Like it's the same element. And it's why bad fantasy is bad and why good fantasy is incredible, right? It is the using this element, this otherworldly thing, whether it be horror, fantasy, even sci-fi, to push character arcs in a different direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And, another medium of storytelling, campaign systems in games.
Yeah. For sure.
And Trench Crusade has that opportunity to kind of tell that same stories, and it goes back to the same thing that, maybe the trappings of the game isn't necessarily your bread and butter, isn't a thing that necessarily is super appealing, but the format of the game rules allows you to tell a really cool narrative tale, and you can model your models however you want, right? It doesn't have to be super deep into the grimdark, but if the grimdark, the absurdity at which we look at the worst of humanity's outcomes, is the medium in which we're able to tell really cool stories about characters that we've developed on the tabletop, right? And to share those experiences with the other human being across the table from us, then I think that's an awesome medium to be able to be, creating those shared experiences and telling those stories.
That's why we do what we do. And also, like, it's the fun of like the reminiscing too. Like, I remember that campaign where this, and this happened. This guy ascended to this. As you mentioned, Yanni, before on this very show, like my Anchorite Shrine was killed by a random peon of a guy,
With a trench knife. I'm still mad about that.
Yeah,
inconceivable. It's great.
But yeah, it's all vibes here. And I think that's what Trench Crusade is too. And so I think Silent Hill was a natural thing to talk about. One other thing I'm talking about Silent Hill that I didn't mention today, which I think is really interesting and might catch people off guard if they lean into my recommendation, is I guess dialogue and acting in these games. It's not melodramatic movie acting. It is regular life people acting, and it's by design. It is not, They didn't hire melodramatic, super, and dramatic people. It is supposed to put yourself in a real world, ordinary sense, and then all of a sudden you're in the supernatural, right? And so it's a weird feature of the games, especially with the protagonists, because they're very grounded in real life, not grounded in cinema media that we're used to, right? Which is melodrama, especially when you take in Asian cultures as well, which I'm a big fan of Japanese and Korean cinema, and like the drama's even pushed further than ours, right? It's just part of their culture. They're more, but like what's interesting about the games is it's intentionally designed this way. And I think it's kind of disarming to you as a person experiencing the story initially. And then the more you're in the story, you're like, oh, this is a regular person with experiencing regular stuff. And oh my gosh, they experienced this insane trauma, or they did this really bad thing or whatever. And it actually kind of sets you up for the punchline easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing too, is we go into games, especially with a bias, thinking like, oh, I need my action hero, kind of a thing. And then come to find out, no, just a normal guy, just dealing with
every Silent Hill game. So enjoy it or hate it, but that's who you are, and you're helpless at times, and it's like survive the monsters, get the puzzle done, and barely survive to the next area.
That's right. And we'd love to hear you guys' opinions on it too. If you got a story with Silent Hill or some of the other games, stuff that you think would stand out as far as the vibes are concerned, let us know. Obviously, you can comment wherever you're listening to this, or you can hit us up on the Discord if you're one of our patrons and you have access to that. Obviously, talk about the episode over there and let us know what's up and what your thoughts are. Or if there's anything you want us to talk about in the Trench Shrine, we're happy to also look at that as well, other topics.
Absolutely. And something Johnny and I are going to work on the Discord in the future is like the Trench Shrine section of the Discord, and just get links there and stuff of stuff we've talked about. And you can go back and listen, look at it, find out your own path through the Trench Shrine stuff. But it's all supposed to accentuate your enjoyment of Trench Crusade in different ways. And so we hope this segment today did that. But of course, closing the show, you can find us everywhere online, but most notably Patreon, YouTube, and the place you can find podcasts. So find us at Saints and Sevens. Go to patreon.com/Saints and Sevens if you want to join the private Discord, directly support the show, get instant access to our future community plans that we have there, and get bonus episodes of the podcast, which we are now trying to buff up as much as we can. You can always email us at saints7s@gmail.com. And something we haven't talked about yet, Johnny, you and I on the show verbally, but I know you talked about last episode. We want to thank Zayo for our show's music, one of our all-time favorite bands. And if I were to tell myself as a teenager that I'd be, collaborating with Zayo in some capacity, I would probably pass out and die at a teenage age. So good that didn't happen.
Yeah, they've been really cool. We'll talk about Zayo at a later time and how we both have ties into those guys and their music. From our backgrounds, but they make great stuff, and you should go check them out. They're linked in the show notes every time, so you can find their website and go listen to their music. Give them some support.
Please do. Yeah. And of course, if you can't support the show via Patreon, the number one way you can support the show is by subscribing on your podcast platform of choice right now. Not everybody subscribes, so please do. And then thumb over and give us 5 stars on your podcast platform of choice. Lets us know and lets the world know that we exist, which is really impactful. Of course, you can find me and Johnny several spaces online, but Discord is the best place. So find me, Jesse, on Discord at my name, Jesse Aiken. That's EAKIN. And check out my other shows about some other great game systems and universes if you want to accentuate your time with those game systems or learn about some game systems that you don't play. So check out Furious Finest about everything Marvel Crisis Protocol and the Marvel Universe. Check out Truth and Reconciliation about everything Halo Flashpoint and the Halo Universe. And check out Hello There about everything Star Wars gaming, specifically Star Wars Shatterpoint and Star Wars Legion and the Star Wars universe. Johnny, where can everyone find you?
Yep, on Discord, you'll find me at TheRealJohnny5 with a period at the end because I'm the real one. And you can check out my other show, You're Such a Nerd. It's a definitive geek culture variety podcast. We talk about all kinds of different stuff, kind of interview style over there. You can find it wherever you listen to any of your podcasts or YouTube. And thanks for hanging out with us while we explore all things Trench Crusade. Keep your heads down and stay safe, Saints.